everybody, and welcome to Inside the Dub, the first official podcast about the WCFHL. A lot of people are talking fantasy football these days. It's that time of year, but not here. We're hardcore. We're hardcore on the WCFHL. This is Jim Dowd, and I'm here with my partner,
Andy McDonald.
We're going to get started here.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I'm excited heading into season 21 to see which team it is that's going to take over.
It's a lot of options this year. We give a nice nod to Mike Marsh for winning his third championship last season. Many strong teams are going to be trying to take him down a peg or two this year, although the Blues are looking strong, I got to say.
Oh, of course. The Blues, they're always looking strong there in the Central Division. But there are numerous teams in the Western Conference. I see 6, 7, 8 contenders, and as well the usual suspects in the Eastern Conference who can jump up and try to challenge the Blues this season.
The truth, if you can believe it, the West looks like it might even be better than it was last year. Last year it was a nightmare to go through that Western Conference playoffs for all those 8 teams, and this year, yeah, if you can believe it, a lot of those teams are looking even stronger. A couple teams are looking to try to rebuild. We had some nice moves in free agency, but it's true. This, 8, 9, 10 teams are going to contend for the playoffs, and there's probably 7 or 8 there that are going to be strong contenders to go to the finals in the West.
Certainly, a team such as the Ottawa Senators last year. If you look into the Atlantic Division, the Ottawa Senators, that's a team that's gotten better pretty well every year. Year over year since Patrick Carlson took over as the general manager. They've got Eric Carlson. They added Brian Campbell.
Yeah, Campbell, that's a big addition to that defense. It's going to look real nice with him back there. I don't know if he'll play with Eric Carlson necessarily, but he gives that team, if they put him down on that second pairing, that's real nice depth offensively for them.
Yeah, supplemented again with Lubomir Wisnowski as well. A lot of offense coming from the back end. It's interesting if that's something that Carlson has kind of picked out as something that he wanted to do, maybe replicate the Calgary Flames NHL strategy.
It could be the case. They got some nice looking forwards as well. If Ryan Johansson can take another step forward this year for them, got the veteran Mike Fisher there anchoring that second line. Looking at the guy like Mike Hoffman, who looked like he was really coming on last season, and he improves. That top 6 looks pretty strong.
Yeah, it does, and they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year and weren't able to finish it off against Dennis in the finals, but they beat a couple good teams along the way and had a good regular season. So it'll be interesting to see if they kind of carry that forward.
The truth, I think, if anything, they definitely proved they're going to be contenders in the East this year, and might as well, if we're going to start this preview, might as well stick with that Atlantic Division. After the Senators, we've got Detroit also looking very strong after their move over there from the Western Conference. Anti's always building a strong team. Always strong and deep, and that defense anchored by Nicholas Gronvall. That's always going to be a nice back end for them.
Yeah, Ante's got a lot of very defensive players there with Cornwall. I mean, he's recently shipped out Dan Girardi, brought in a little more offense with Ryan Ellis.
Just today, as we were preparing for this podcast, that's right, Girardi and Kulikov headed to Chicago.
Yeah, it was an interesting swap. I found Ante had kind of expressed a desire to move some depth from the defense and into the forward, and he ended up kind of doing more of a 2-for-2 swap there on the deep defensive end. So it'll be interesting to see if he kind of makes another addition up front to make up for the trade of Malkin there.
That's the truth, and I do think, that's a good deal for Detroit, that Oduya is a solid guy, and I think Ellis is going to really surprise people this year. I think he's going to come on offensively, and he is on a prime contract, just making a little over $1.7 million for the next 3 seasons. I think that's going to look real nice in Detroit here if he sticks around, and pairing him up with Ekholm, they're doing the same as the Nashville Predators in the NHL, which could be a good move.
Certainly. Yeah, he has put together a team that, along with the Senators, could be one of the head contenders for the Atlantic Division title in season 20.
Oh, I definitely agree. And when you got the Sedin twins on the team, the forwards are going to be strong. I love, Patrick Sharp back there as well, or up there, excuse me, as well. Looks nice. And, like Ginla, they've got that veteran presence. They've got guys who can score. They've got guys, they've got good leadership, a good all-around squad. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them at the top of that division.
Another team that's kind of stepped up and then backwards recently was the Buffalo Sabres. They've recently traded Sean Couturier. They were had a little interest in moving to be a little more competitive this season with the maturation of John Tavares, and they had a good season last year, but the maturation of John Tavares has really allowed them to push forward. And they took a little bit of a step back immediately with Sean Couturier, but picked up a nice prospect in Max Domi.
Yeah, that's the truth. And with Tavares, whenever you've got a guy like that on your team, he's a bona fide scoring superstar. He's always going to be leading that team. They're never going to be out completely of contention, at least for the playoffs, and then maybe even to sneak into that Eastern Conference final. And when you look at the East, it's there's a lot of rebuilding teams, a lot of teams moving out talent right now to look at the next couple of seasons. And the East, you got a couple teams at the top, but they're wide open. So Buffalo, if they can make another run and then stay strong, maybe look to pick up a couple of veterans, add some depth as the season goes on if things go well. There's no reason that they can't contend in that Eastern Conference, especially with Corey Schneider back there as well, one of the better goalies in the league. They got a pretty solid defense, maybe a little nondescript, but good, solid defensive guys back there. No one can hurt you too bad.
No real star to jump out with Irov, Shannon, Scandella, and Colburn, but you're not going to have too easy of a time getting past those guys and knocking some past Corey Schneider. So it's a very competitive team and can kind of go in either direction. You can have a continued focus on the future, or if you wanted to kind of go for it this year, Stock Cameron could really look to grab the Atlantic title from the other two teams.
That's the truth, and you're right. It's a good thing if things go poorly. You've still got those building blocks of Tavares and Schneider, and you can start moving out some of those vets for some valuable draft picks, cash, some cap relief, and all that. So they're going to have a lot of options as the season goes on.
Another team in the Atlantic Division here is David Rayfuse, the Montreal Canadiens. Been a rebuilding effort, taking over one of the more barren rosters in the WCFHL after his victory with the Rangers. What are your thoughts here with the Montreal Canadiens heading into the season?
Well, I got to say, it's nice to see a GM, after he went and took those Rangers to the finals, won that title. It's nice to see someone, step into a rebuilding project and try to do something new. Everyone likes to contend, but sometimes it's fun to get in there and try to shape a team in your own image. And we all know he loves his Canadians and would love to start shaping those guys into a contender over the next couple of years. This year, unlikely that they're going to be doing too much. They'll be in contention for some high draft picks, but there's a few guys that can move out on that roster, or maybe look to build around. You look at a guy like Thomas Hickey, who maybe hasn't come on the way that we hoped that he would over the last few years, or the way that he hoped he would, but still got potential. Some defensemen take a little bit longer to develop, and I think he's still got a lot of potential back there. And then, you look at that depth is going to be important, especially if you're looking to make deals and help out some contenders to near the deadline to get some added draft picks or young players.
It will be interesting to see how Zach Kassian does here as a wild card. Has the potential to really try to make a name for himself, or he can kind of fizzle away and yet again not show that potential that he could have. Although in the most recent draft there, David Rayfuse picked up some nice players in Pavel Zacha as well as in Noah Juleson. So it's good foundation building blocks moving forward, and he's took the slow road to a rebuild after the win, but a lot of pieces to move forward with.
That's true. You hit the nail on the head there, Andy, on that. I love that Pavel Zacha. That guy, I think, is going to be a big-time player in the league, maybe sooner rather than later, too. I think that maybe he's been a little bit overlooked as far as the talent, because of the talent at the top of that draft, but I think that guy's no joke, and I think he'll be stepping into the league here a little bit earlier than people think.
That would be a big move for the Canadiens if he were able to do that. Speaking of the Canadiens, we'll have to look at some of their rivals there in the Atlantic Division, Toronto and Boston. The Leafs actually picked up one of the players in one of the biggest trades of the off season. I thought so, but what are your thoughts on the Leafs?
Well, Nico, he's always taken an interesting and new route. He really picked up he had a team there that was really a big time contender for a while, and then realized that he was carrying a lot of big contracts and realized that maybe he wasn't going to be able to move through and stay in contention with having to re-sign some of these guys and spending all this money. So definitely moved out some of those big deals, brought in guys who are a little younger. Tried to start that rebuild, but without completely tearing things apart. Although I guess I say that, and he did end up with quite a high pick this last season. I know the move you're talking about, that trade for Claude Giroux. Big time deal, big guy to bring in. Usually, Drew's still young, so you can still build around him. He's still got that time. Doesn't mean you have to try to contend right away. The Leafs, they've got some space. They've got, they don't have to worry too much about the cap right now. And they also signed Ryan Callahan here in free agency to a 5-year deal, a real whopper there for Callahan. So I think that they're going to try to build that team up around Giroux and Callahan, a couple of really talented forwards, and then just kind of see what they've got. I wouldn't be surprised to see them take maybe this year to kind of build the team, and then really try to step into contention next year and the year after.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's a lot of players who you don't necessarily need to push for contention right away with, given their age, but yet they'll still able to make them more competitive this season, especially after trading away a prospect like Hannafin, but getting Giroux and Ryan Callahan, and recently picked up Jason Demers from Arizona earlier in the off season. So they're adding some professional depth and some top line players like Giroux. It'll really help them moving forward this season and next season as they move other players around them.
The truth, I think we see a lot of depth on this team, and the kind of team where if Mikko doesn't think they can be big-time contenders this year, you might start to see some of these guys packaged together for upgraded players, maybe even early in the season. There's a lot of guys that they've got signed to longer-term contracts, which we've learned is really valuable in the WCFHL. Guys who are on these 2, 3, 4, even 5-year deals. Well, 5 maybe Callahan only, but people are willing to pay some money for that. It's the financial stability has become really important in these last couple of years. Everyone's paying a little more attention with the 229 rules and some better free agencies going on. And I do think that you might start seeing some of these guys packaged. Doing a package deal, a guy like Louis Eriksson packaged with someone like maybe Enstrom or Demers that you mentioned to try to get a big upgrade at forward or defense.
Yes, certainly. I mean, cost certainty is something that all the GMs in the WCHL are moving towards prioritizing in the trade market. It seems, everybody wants to know what they'll need to pay, how they can fit underneath the salary cap in order to stay competitive, and for some teams stay above the salary floor. But the contract negotiations and the situation with free agency has really made an increased focus on the financial dimension for the WCHL.
The truth. And then after Toronto, we move on to that other big Montreal rival, the Boston Bruins. Drew Barclay, longtime owner in the league here, definitely been making some big moves this off season. And again, assembling a team that in this Eastern Conference, you don't have to have the best team in the league to contend. You can contend with just a solid roster. You put a couple runs together. He's got Sergei Bobrovsky back there to tend in the goal, and a couple of hot runs from Bobrovsky, and get some goals from Bobby Ryan, guys like that, and you can see them up there near the top of that division as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the addition of Wayne Simmons and Antoine Vermette, it was in the Joe Pavelski trade, that gave them a little more depth on the pro roster, and kind of gave them the ability to use the depth, make up for the depth that they'd previously used to go after Bobby Ryan earlier in the off season. So, I like what Drew's done here with the team, and he's been a competitive GM. He'll go for it, and he knows the value of his players. So it'll be interesting to see what he does throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's definitely the truth, and I agree. There's a lot of moves that can be made, and especially for these teams who are kind of in this middling, some of the Eastern Conference teams who are in this, we don't have to be great to contend. So do we try to contend with these, with the team that maybe isn't the greatest, or do we start to break down maybe mid-season or even early in the season, when people don't have their eyes much on contracts and on the salary cap, later in the year, trying to move someone like a Zajac or somebody like that who's got, a $6 million deal might be a little harder, when you're getting up against the the trade deadline, but early on when teams are looking to fill those holes. It'll be interesting to see what a team like this will do.
Certainly, I couldn't agree with you more. We'll move on now to the Florida Panthers. Devin Cordell's put together a team here. From top to bottom, he recently moved Tuukka Rask, big name player, to the St. Louis Blues, and currently has Ryan Miller there as his starting goalie heading into the season. What are your expectations for the Panthers here? This is a team that could kind of go either way, as many of these teams in the Atlantic Division could.
Yep, that's definitely the truth. I'll say that I'm shocked at the number of times that Rask has been traded here over the last couple seasons. One of the premier talents in the net, and one of the younger premier talents. But he's hopped around quite a bit. I really thought when he went to Florida that he'd be there for that'd be his home for a good while. But I do think Florida, making a trade like that and picking up Ryan Miller, that does show that they want to stay, either stay in contention, or they're going to look to flip these guys and really break this team apart. They've got guys who have good value. Miller is a little older, but his ratings are high. His salary's not terrible for a goalie who can definitely start for just about any team in the league. Same with Dan Boyle. He's got kind of a big contract, but he's a big minute defenseman, guy who's legit number 1/number 2 guy. Could definitely bring back a decent return. Or if he sticks around and stays on the team again, this Florida team, looking closer to this Atlantic Division, it really is just wide open.
Yes, I mean, it looks as though there's more of a emphasis towards maybe prioritizing the future with that Rask trade. Picking up the Memorial Cup MVP and Leon Draisaitl, and having players like Derek Pouliot, and also adding Marco Dano, who could have a big year coming up. So there's a lot to rebuild with Florida, but as you say, just being in the mix, it's not a bad strategy for some of these teams, and especially in the Atlantic Division, but in the Eastern Conference as a whole.
That's true. And looking at some of these forwards for Florida here, you're right. They definitely are building a nice core of younger guys, and I mean, even they've got some younger guys who are real veterans. You look down at a name like Blake Wheeler, who, unbelievable to me that Blake Wheeler is only 28 years old. It seems like he's been around forever after being that big time surprise draft pick for Wayne Gretzky back in his days in Phoenix. And a guy like Adam Henrique, who seems like he's probably been around 10-15 years and he's only 25. This is definitely a team that's got some solid young forwards, guys who may not be ready to put them over the top this year, but are on their way.
Oh, certainly. Certainly, it'll be interesting to see what Devin Cordell is going to do here, moving in through season 21. Trevor Toms is the general manager of the last team we'll look at here in the Atlantic Division, Tampa Bay Lightning. Trevor's there's an eclectic mix of players on here, some high-end talent on the defensive end, as well as some big names up front with Getzlaf and James Van Riemsdyk. This is the team that could be up there with the Ottawa Senators and the other teams there in the Atlantic Division, the Detroit Red Wings. Sorry about that, Jim. And then, so it'll be interesting to see here now if Trevor's going to kind of double down and stay competitive, or if he wants to rebuild.
Mm-hmm, that's the truth. I think when you look at the names on this roster and some of the moves, I would say that this is one of the teams that I say definitely is going to try to contend in this Atlantic Division. Getzlaf, again, one of the premier forwards in the league, always a great guy to build around. He's 30 years old, though, so it's this is kind of the time for them to try to make a run if they're going to keep him around as their leader. Again, JVR, giving them good offensive production. Guys like Pominville and Hornquist and Vanek, all getting up there into their late 20s, early 30s, getting some miles on the tires. So I'd say, it's time to try to make a run with this team for this division. Got Bufflin and Bomeister on the back end. That's no joke. That's a great 1-2 punch back there. And, you got Fleury in the net. He's going to keep you in every game, every night.
Absolutely. It's a strong roster from top to bottom here. It'll be interesting to see if Michel Therrien can meld all of these personalities together. He's a strong personality himself and regimented, but he's had success in the WCFHL before, and he's got a lot of talent here to work with. So
certainly agree with you there.
So that wraps up the Atlantic Division there, Jim. We'll move over to the Metropolitan and take a look at a division that features two of the heaviest hitters in the Eastern Conference.
I think that's exactly right. We've got the Washington Capitals. Dennis, always a contender. Went last year to the finals, and I won't say he pushed the Blues to the limit, as the Blues really just kind of tore everybody apart throughout the playoffs last year. But it's no joke to whenever Dennis is a GM of a team, he's a threat to bring that team to the finals. And again, his roster this year is once again looking very strong. Maybe he's made a few moves with the eye on the future, but no matter what, to really try to rebuild or break that team down would take some real doing. And you don't bring in guys like Joe Thornton, trade away and then reacquire, Ovechkin, re-sign Yager. You don't make those moves if you don't want to contend.
Yeah, I've never questioned Dennis's ability to stay competitive and to really push to be one of the top teams year after year, and bringing in TJ Oshie this year, that'll help him do that. I'm looking at his strategy, his moves as of late, and it's I'd say it'd be dangerous for a lot of the teams in the WCFHL to know that he's been had a keen eye in trying to add value and add some liquidity through his prospects and his draft picks, so that he can have the flexibility to make those trades that he's known for later in the year. So he'll get a feel. I'm fully confident that he'll get a feel for his lineup. Very competitive lineup already with Ovechkin, Backstrom, Kunitz, Yager, Oshie, Thornton. A strong top six, solid defenseman. Great asset. Braden Holtby in the back end with a low cap hit is one of the biggest assets in the WCFHL in terms of the goaltender market. And I have total confidence that Dennis is going to end up packaging a lot of these prospects and picks together to really figure out what he needs and go get it in the trade market over the next 8 months.
I'll definitely. I'm right behind you on that one. I think some of these guys that have been in the league a while, you've seen. They might start to look like they're making some moves to get younger, rebuild. What they're really doing is kind of tooling up to make that one big acquisition. And if you look at the back end, it's very solid top six, but no one's spectacular back there. So I do wonder if some of these acquisitions that Dennis is making, he's working on a package to pick up a big minute number one guy back there.
Yeah, that's a very likely possibility. He's recently moved out, I believe, Chris Letang in the Evgeny Kuznetsov deal, and recently moved Johnny Boychuk there for Bear Jackman, who's a very serviceable replacement defenseman and some futures. So it'll be interesting to see if he goes after someone. Say Zdeno Chara's name's been out there for a while from with the Los Angeles Kings, so maybe that's a match. We know these two have a history before, and maybe they could work something out. Maybe add Chara to his back end, and then all of a sudden he's looking again to be one of the favorites, as if he already isn't, but one of the favorites to be going to the conference finals and the finals again. That 3 years in a row would be something spectacular for Dennis Jorgensen.
That's the truth. And the other big time strong team in that division, I think. Team 1 or 1A, at least in the Eastern Conference after this offseason, is the Philadelphia Flyers, who haven't had a lot of success against Dennis. Greg Domino and his team have been thwarted by Dennis and his Caps a few times, and I know that some of these moves are expressly made to make sure that doesn't happen in the playoffs this season.
Certainly, I mentioned Braden Holtby's contract situation as a major asset, and kind of going head-to-head with that is Ben Bishop. Ben Bishop, he's got the greater view as an overall player right now in the WCFHL for an impact-wise this season. But he's on that 1 year deal. But he's great low cap hit, which enables him to have a team like Ryan Suter and Brent Burns and Brad Stewart, on the back end with monster lineup of Canadian forwards up front. There's no secret. Greg Domino's got the, with Eric Stahl, Jordy Ben, Corey Perry, Rick Nash. These are big Canadian forwards, national team forwards that are really going to make the Flyers a tough out for Washington this season, and an early favorite for the WCFHL championship.
I'd put them right up there, yeah, and it's true what you say about Holtby. A contract, having a goalie like that making less than $4 million allows you to make a move like bringing in Eric Stahl, who, while his skills might be a little bit less than they were 3 or 4 years ago, he's still a legit #1 center in there. And he's got a big contract, but having some of these smaller deals for big-time players around him allows you to bring in a guy like that. And I'm a big Stahl fan myself. I think that he's going to be great there. And depending on who they pair him with, they've got some lineups that are going to be an absolute nightmare for teams to play against down low. I mean, the defenses are not going to want to look up and see these guys on the other side of the ice.
No, it's a big team, and this is a team, the type of team that I think that Greg there in Philly is, with the identity of the city and just the way that he associates with the game of hockey is he really wants those big bodies and have a team that's tough to play against. And he's been successful in putting it together, and it'll be interesting to see if it works out for him in season 21.
Yes, I definitely agree. He's been toiling a long time and very hard in Philadelphia, so it'll be interesting to see what that means for him this year.
Another team there in the Metropolitan Division, a team that with a very active general manager in Dylan Darby is the Pittsburgh Penguins. They've I don't know if GM Darby really had any time to himself in the summer. He was too busy compiling an off the list draft list for his 45 picks in the draft. It was a successful haul. How do you see the Penguins shaping up?
I mean, I think you're right about that. I think that I don't know what the record is for draft picks made in a season, but that's got to be close. And he was busy scouting. I don't think he's had a minute to himself. I agree. You see the roster as it stands today is not great. I don't think they're contenders even in the East, which is a little bit on the weaker side. But I do think that the way that they're building this team up and bringing in young players, they're not far away. Might not be a year away, might not be 2 years away, but 2-3 years down the line, I think this team's going to look very good. Especially if some of these off the list guys hit. They picked up in the deal for Letang. They picked up Thomas Hertl and Nino Niederreiter, who two guys who maybe they haven't proven their stars yet, but 21, 22 years old. Those guys can play. They can score. They've both proven that they have real potential to be top 6, if not top 3 guys, and for a rebuilding team, that's a huge asset to have, starting out. Yeah,
and a roll of the dice by GM Darby for this upcoming season. It seems as though by his own making, he will attempt to be more competitive this season, even in spite of a kind of a weakened roster. But trading his 2016 first rounder for David Pastrnak last year was really kind of a signal that he must be confident that he won't be one of the bottom 5 teams again this season. He was in that position last year, picked up Jack Eichel, and must be hoping that Eichel can have an impact on the roster alongside Pastrnak this season to ensure that Lawrence Bailey doesn't end up with a top 5 pick.
That's the truth, and no, you're right about that. And again, this Eastern Conference, no matter how it shakes out, these teams are all going to have a chance. If just a couple of these guys come up with big years, that could propel them out. And I do think a bottom 5 finish is, even though this roster is not the best, I don't think a bottom 5 finish is too likely. I think they'll be able to stay, maybe into that 10 range, which would still be a nice pick for Lawrence, but definitely he's hoping that the Penguins are going to be terrible this year.
Yes, certainly, and depending on how Pastrnak develops here, if he continues up his the torrid pace that he had in the AHL last year, and the promise that he showed, then it could end up that he would be higher value than whoever would be available at 10 to 15 next year. But if not, it's quite the risk for a rebuilding team to end up losing that.
That is the truth. Yeah, they're with Pastrnak and Hertl and Niederreiter. They've got some prime guys for the possible re-rates here mid-season, depending on how these guys start off. If they start off hot, you might see some big jumps there in those numbers.
Yes, another player that's interesting that they picked up was Chris Kelly there in the free agency. Dylan Darby was quite active in free agency, and it seemed like he must have targeted specific players that he wanted. So it's a lot of thought going into this roster, and that was evident in the big haul in the 2015 draft. So the Islanders and Peter Beaton. He one of the most active general managers in the WCFHL. How do you see this lineup shaking down after the acquisition of Evgeny Malkin?
Well, it's interesting. We all heard Beaton talked this offseason about taking a step back from contention and trying to really, shape the team into a real contender, not just a pretender. I know last year they had a great year and then got bounced in the playoffs. I know that was disappointing, but I know they also played better last year than maybe everyone thought they were going to. So we hear him have, talk a bit about stepping back and moving away from some of these guys to really try to rebuild. But then you pick up a guy like Malkin, and that's a move you make when you want to contend. The forwards look pretty strong again. Another deep group of forwards here in the Eastern Conference. Plekanec always is looking good, always putting up good numbers in the WCFHL. Malkin obviously doesn't need any real review there. Filppula, if he can kind of turn it around and score some goals this year, looks real nice. So again, deep group of forwards. Defense that is solid, maybe even a little underrated, some of these defensive players on this team. I love the pickup of Stefan Robida in the free agency. He's one of the hardest working and most consistent defensemen back there, and you've got Alsner and Hayda and Truba and Mark Stahl. I mean, this is a deep defensive group, and you can get a couple of these guys packaged together and get an upgrade or two. It's going to look even better.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential moves here that Peter Beaton could make, and really, as we mentioned, so far there's only really two top-notch contenders there with the Flyers and the Capitals. Although you'd be tempted to throw the Senators and maybe the Lightning and Red Wings in that conversation, and kind of as a second tier. It'd be interesting to see that. Peter Beaton could really do another package maybe similar to the Malkin trade and add one or two players and switch his focus and go for it this year. He's got the prospects to do so with Barzal and Sam Reinhart and Nick Merkley and Anthony D'Angelo. He's got a lot of pieces that he could move and namely looking at the roster construction, you'd be remiss to mention that this team must have the most centers out of any team in recent memory. Plekanec, Franz Nielsen, Evgeny Malkin, Ryan O'Reilly, Filppula, R.J. Umberger, Marcus Johansson, and all these, Daniel Winnick, they're all capable of playing center. There's you look at the top six, which you have Malkin, Plekanec, and O'Reilly, and Filppula, and Franz Nielsen, and they're all potential centers. So it'll be a lot of depth for Peter to move from, more flexibility in the lineup, however you want to look at it.
That's true. Flexibility is always good. It is true. Only two guys on that roster listed as not being able to line up as centers, Matt Molson and Brad Marchand. And I think, in a pinch, you could probably put Molson in the middle. Again, probably most centers in the league, and then the deepest defense. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some more moves before the season starts.
Especially with an active and capable general manager like Peter Beaton. And we'll talk about active general managers and those who have done a great job forming the roster. Kevin Switzer is another example of this. Top-notch young talent on this roster with Nathan McKinnon and Seth Jones and the like, just all throughout the lineup. What are your thoughts on Columbus and the move that they made for Steve Stamkos, moving him out to Colorado earlier in the offseason?
Yeah, Stamkos, there's another guy who has moved a shocking number of times for being one of the premier young talents in the league, but sometimes it's like, you got to look and think that maybe one player isn't as important as adding depth to your team. And it's true, this list of young forwards, it looks really nice here in Columbus, and it's been a long, hard road for the Blue Jackets over the years. They've had a few really high highs, a few really low lows, but nice to see the team really kind of coming together. Some of the younger players who are looking really good. Johnny Goodrow, Colin Wilson still has time to develop. Again, as you mentioned, McKinnon, Sean Monahan. Definitely a team that, another one of those teams that may not be a big-time contender this year, but has the names, and if they develop quickly, could really be looking very strong in the East for the next few years to come. And, you never know when they've got that amazing Mason Raymond on the team. He could put up another 90, 100-point season, and then all of a sudden, there you are, you're contending right there in the East.
Yeah, he is about as big a wild card as it gets in the dub these days. Jordan Eberle's another player that will likely help, and Zach Bogosian, both players that came back in the Stamkos trade, that will help this team when they decide to make that leap. This is a team that kind of went back and forth under the tutelage former GM Derek Roslanek, and since Kevin has taken over, has really had that focus on youth. Hasn't really moved too much youth out for veteran presence. It doesn't seem, with the focus to do that. More value trades and making sure that keeps the focus of his team moving forward. I specifically like the swap that he did there with Stamkos, acquiring him from St. Louis for, three pieces which were, extremely replaceable in the deal that he eventually made with James Love. Specifically moving out Nyquist and Saad, two players who move around the 50 to 60 point range, but neither are have yet to have that exceptional breakthrough. And Tyson Barrie's more of a one-dimensional defenseman. And then being able to flip that into Jordan Eberle and Bogosian and some other assets, that's another shrewd move from Kevin.
Yeah, well, he's definitely doing it the right way, and it's you can tell he doesn't want to contend for the playoffs. He wants to contend for the cup, and there's something to be said for trying to make the playoffs every year. But the teams, you really want to build that real base that you think is going to get you, a couple of star players, a couple of young developing guys, a couple of veterans that could really contend for the cup, not just for the 7th or 8th seed.
The New Jersey Devils are another metropolitan team here that look to maybe be taking a step back after a team where they for a while were loaded with top-notch talent with David Backes and Claude Giroux and players like this, and now maybe Emil Lakatos is taking a bit of a step back, rebuilding a bit, focusing on that with the acquisition of Noah Hannafin and Toronto's first there in that trade. How do you feel about New Jersey?
Well, I think you're right about that. I think New Jersey went through a few years where they really pushed to be that contending team. You mentioned guys like Backes back when they drafted Jeff Skinner and he turned out so well. Giroux, Cam Ward, their longtime starter in net. And you start to see them start to take steps away. You hear rumors of Ward being available. You see Giroux moved out for some younger talent. You see a guy bringing in a guy like Tyler Ennis, who I've always really liked, who I think can really score some goals, can really play some good offense for them, but who has a few more years to develop and also is on a relatively cheap contract. Shouldn't cost too much to re-sign next season. Bringing in a guy like Melker Karlsson, who we don't know exactly what he is yet, but at the very least a good depth, maybe third line forward who could step into the second line duty as well. But I do think that it's true. I think they're stepping away from trying to be that contender in the East and maybe going to regroup a little bit and then come around in another year or two with a big push.
Certainly. I mean, you mentioned it there with the Jeff Skinner pick. That Emil Lakatos really went on a limb there, moving up and making a note to pick Skinner at the position, and he went on to have terrific success. Mikko Rantanen drafted this year, Jeremy Gracco. A couple prospects that he's picked to jumpstart his rebuild, and he has 2 firsts in the 2016 draft as well as 2 firsts in the 2017, including Toronto Maple Leafs. So couple 4 second rounders in 2016, and Emil continues that strong ability to draft and scout these players, and he could be having success in kind of rebuilding this team back up to what it was quite recently, as a contender in the Eastern Conference.
Yep, that's the truth.
So there's 2 other teams that we'll look at here in the Metropolitan. The New York Rangers, under new management, a team that it would be interesting to see. A couple moves have been made, Taylor Hall and also the Bobby Ryan deal. It'll be interesting to see, exactly what ended up happening. It's kind of been more sand-pat since the big moves earlier in the summer.
That's true. Bill Grote, long-time, very experienced GM, stepping in to take over this Rangers team. When a new GM comes in, it always takes a little while to feel out the league, for the league to get a feel for him and see what he's trying to do. I think, the moves to move away from Taylor Hall and Bobby Ryan, I think that's definitely a nod towards an attempt at a much more long-term kind of build-up instead of just, quick fixes here and there. Already also has moved out Andrew Ladd, who's a big part of that Taylor Hall deal. So, it's nice to see a new guy come into the league and start wheeling and dealing and kind of shaping the roster that he wants to, the way he wants to. They've got some good young talent on that roster still, even having moved guys out. a guy like Artem Anisimov, who, this year could take a big step forward. He's looking at a much bigger role in the NHL. Could even end up playing some second-line forward for a very good offensive team in Chicago. So he's a guy that could definitely be looking at a big ratings jump. And then you've got your couple guys that are taking a chance on here. A couple good defensemen there with Goligoski and Andrei Sekera. Those guys are building block type guys who can be around for a long time. Goligoski is going to be $229 this year, but he shouldn't, again, cost too much to re-sign. So they get him into a big deal, long deal, and then they've got Sekera back there. That's a real solid top 2 defenseman. And again, also those guys always generate a lot of interest around the league, so I could see them being moved as well. But yeah, you never really know exactly what a new guy's going to do until they step in and really start making moves, and you get to see him over a season or two.
Yeah, there's a lot here in terms of valuable assets that have been added. 3 first-round picks, and we all know the value of a first-round pick in the WCFHL is quite high. People like to make sure that they're able to get the prospects and the players that they want to. Adding Panarin recently in the trade, high off the list pick last year, but could have some potential to really develop. There's a lot of picks that could be moved or could be kept and form a good building foundation for this team.
That's true. Well, Panarin, the highest off-list player ever drafted here in Dub. And already caused a little controversy. Been moved in a trade that was blocked, and then now got moved in another trade that I believe was reviewed. I can't remember exactly. I know there's so many reviews there in a short period of time, but moving out moving in, and then moving out Eric Stahl very quickly. Adding an asset like Panarin, who's another guy. Panarin, another guy who could step into that Chicago lineup and produce points early on. Kind of one of the darlings of the off the list community. And not maybe surprising, but not as surprising as it would have been a few years ago for Dennis to step in and then swipe him with the 20th pick.
Yeah, certainly. There's been much more of an emphasis on these off-the-list players. Perhaps to be something else for us to catch up about in more depth to kind of re-examine the frequency of the off-the-list selections. But keeping an eye on the focus in the Metropolitan in our season 21 preview, the Carolina Hurricanes with Neil Burkholder, another newer general manager to the WCFHL. Young lineup, young roster. There's some focus on collecting future draft picks, a little depth in goaltending, things like this. How do you see that team?
Well, I think you're right. It's another interesting thing. Neil's been in the league getting his feet wet here for a season or so. And again, he took over a team that wasn't an amazing squad, so it takes a little bit more time to get some of these teams worked out, especially as a new guy in the league. But there's some very very interesting names on this roster with Sabinajad and Thomas Yurko, Emerson Detem. I mean, good forwards, Bo Bennett on there, and then defensemen they've got Hamonic and Tyler Myers. Who Myers is maybe just a little bit of a disappointment going into his 25th year, or his year 25, his age 25 season, excuse me. But again, defensemen, sometimes we see them develop a little slower, and he came up real quick into the league.
He leveled a little bit, out, and then could develop from that point. It'll be interesting. Interesting watching Tyler Myers. Their prospect pool is something that it's a source of strength league-wide. I mean, they picked up Andrew Hammond there. I kind of bring him up as goaltending depth. Braden Point looks to be a strong prospect, as Barbashev, yet another strong prospect. Players like Sonny Milano, who they picked up a couple years ago, and Robbie Fabry, as well as Nick Patan. There's quite a number of players that jump out at you in this Carolina Hurricanes prospect pool. Josh was saying a lot of potential, so it'll we'll want to watch them, and a team that already has a ton of depth at the pro level, and we'll have to sort this out. Currently with I'd say just under 20 defensemen on the professional roster. It'll be something that will be sorted out and be able to stock a good team in Charlotte. But
well, that's true. They do have that nice looking prospect depth. It'll be interesting to see. First of all, I'll say again about their prospects. I thought they had a great draft with Guryanov and DeBrusk and Sprong, getting them all in the top 40. There's some really strong picks there, as well as later on, Rasmus Andersson and Yakov Trenin. Some really nice looking names there. So I think that was a very successful draft for them. And then also picking up Andrew Hammond, maybe the idea is to bring Hammond in and look what he might do in net. Their goalie situation is not good right now, with LaBarbera there penciled in as their starter as of today, but I doubt that that's going to happen. As the season goes on, I imagine that they'll be bringing in somebody else, and maybe it's Andrew Hammond. Maybe that's who they think is going to be the answer, at least in the immediate future, in net for them.
Yeah, it'll be a situation I'll be sure to keep an eye on. I believe that ends the summary of the Eastern Conference there.
Listening to our Eastern Conference WCFHL preview here on the first episode of Inside the Dub. Hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed doing it.
Yes, I echo the sentiment there, Jim. Thank you for everyone for listening, and we'll look forward to reconnecting with you on our Western Conference preview.
Be coming soon.